Good evening. Thanks for coming here and being a part of Artsvote Ontario 2022. I'm Bill Kimball. I'm the president of the board of the Electric City Culture Council, EC3, and also the executive director of Public Energy and Performing Arts in my spare time. And of course, we want to start off by acknowledging that the land and waters on which we gather are in Treaty 20, Mississauga territory, the traditional territory of Mississauga and Chippewa First Nations, home to the Williams Treaties First Nations. And these people have been stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters for countless generations. And they continue this work to this day. So on behalf of EC3, I commit to supporting their work and doing all we can towards real truth and reconciliation, and to supporting the work of Indigenous artists by providing a space for them to work, be heard, and respected. Artsvote's events have a long tradition here in Peterborough. We're pleased and proud to work with the whole coalition, the Artsvote Coalition, our colleagues, organizing this evening's discussion, and delighted to welcome candidates Jen Deck, the NDP, Greg Dempsey, Liberal, and Robert Gibson from the Green Party. Peterborough is home to dozens of arts organizations, hundreds of artists, thousands of audience members, volunteers, sponsors, and donors. More people participate in the arts in Peterborough than in sports. The arts helped all of us get through COVID-19, at least so far, and contribute more than $10 million to the local economy on an annual basis, while enhancing the vibrancy of our heritage downtown. Today, perhaps more than ever, we're reminded that how very fortunate we are to live in a democracy, to be able to vote for provincial elected representatives, and to find out at events like this what they think and know about the arts, and how they will work, if elected, to support the development of local artists and this riding's arts community. Tonight's proceedings are being videotaped and will be available on our website and YouTube channel on Monday. So please don't forget to vote on or before June 2nd. Now, over to Ditta, EC3's Executive Director.
Thanks, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. Boy, it just seems like so much work these days, doesn't it? If it's not a pandemic, it's a tornado, it's a terrible windstorm, there are branches everywhere, and I feel guilty yet grateful to say that I got power back on late Saturday night, and so if anybody needs a hot bath, call me tomorrow morning. Sunday night. Okay. I just wanted to start out tonight by acknowledging some people who are here with us, along with these wonderful candidates. And I should just say an aside that we really have put the candidates through their paces. For this particular round of Artsvote Ontario. We had some feedback about previous events, and many artists and arts leaders in the community asked us to do something that was a little bit more intimate than the stage setup, and where we gave the candidates an opportunity to know ahead of time what kinds of things were on our mind and what kinds of issues and challenges this sector faces, and to think about how they and their parties might respond. I'd also like to acknowledge the fact that we have some very important artists here with us tonight, two of whom are serving as moderators. The fabulous Sarah Lewis. Sarah, can you stand up? Peterborough's official Sarah has been, and I can say this without blushing, an international success story. She's just done an amazing job, and we want to thank the City of Peterborough because Sarah was part of the first program, the pilot program, and that program has been approved and will be a permanent program. We will always. Also, Ziysah Von B. This is what I'm calling you these days, Ziysah. Is also an outstanding poet. She was a runner-up for Poet Laureate, and we're thrilled that she's here with us tonight. And trying to remember, I think that you were part of Poetry Month as well. And we're very honored to have her here as a moderator and as an artist. And both Sarah and Ziysah will be performing poems at the end of the evening. Jeff Macklin, who's very shy and hates it when I do this, but I'm going to do it anyway because Jeff designed a fabulous logo for all of the Artsvote events. So there are slightly different versions for Ontario, for the municipal, and for the federal election, but we always hear from people that it's wonderful and eye-catching, so thanks, Jeff.
Yeah.
I'm just going to start out with a few things that are on my mind, and I guess the most important thing is just to talk for a minute about art and why it matters. And many of you know I'm prone to quoting Maya Angelou on things of this nature, or Herbert Marcuse, or Georgia O'Keeffe, but tonight I'm going to quote Phil. I'm going to quote Phil from that Netflix program about, somebody needs to feed Phil, and he runs around the world and eats all this incredible food until finally you have to turn off the streaming because you just got to go eat something. Normally I wouldn't think of him as an expert on the arts, but last night when I was watching it, he said something that really stuck with me. He said, the arts are not disposable. They are the answer. And I think that's the credo that holds our arts community together, that holds EC3 together, is that we believe in our bones, in our minds, and in our hearts that we can't imagine a world without art. And that we want to commit our lives to making sure that artists get paid for their work, that they can keep creating, and that more and more people can keep taking advantage of the arts. They lift our spirits, sharpen our view of the world, make us think and feel, and most importantly, imagine how the planet, our culture, and our experience on Earth might be different than it is now. Different and better. They tell our stories, record and shape and reshape our histories, and connect us to each other. They are a powerful economic driver. They are a powerful vehicle to improve mental health. And most importantly, I want to remind you that art comes from artists. Now, I've been an arts administrator and a curator all my life, but art doesn't come from people like me. It comes from artists. So in all our thinking and our policy making, and when we try and wrestle with issues and decision making, we try to think about the artist as the prime driver. It matters whose stories get told, whose visions we see, and what history takes shape and form in the arts. And that's why diversity, equity, and inclusion are so important to EC3 and need to be central to all policy making in the arts. Outstanding public support for the arts in both policy and funding is crucial to opening our eyes and ensuring a diversity of voices enrich us in every art form, no matter what its shape or form. Tonight we'll hear from 3 local candidates, Jan Leck, representing the NDP, Greg Dempsey, representing the Liberals, and Robert, my brain just... Gibson, thank you, representing the Green Party. We did invite Dave Smith, but he declined our invitation, and also declined our invitation to send a representative a video or a statement. But we're just thrilled to have 3 such distinguished Peterboroughans here with us tonight. Just to explain the format a little bit, all of the candidates received and responded to 4 questions in advance. You can find those questions on our website, and I'm pretty sure Gabe's put out all of it out on social media as well. They'll each have 5 minutes to answer the question. The question will be posed by one of our 4 moderators, starting with Steve Guthrie, and each candidate will have 5 minutes to make a closing statement. After this evening's event, and after the videotape's been available for a couple of days, we will ask all of the members of the Arts Artsvote Coalition, and a pretty big group of about 75 people who we call the Leadership Caucus, who are leaders of every kind of arts organization you can imagine, both professional, paraprofessional, and amateur groups in the city, people who we feel pretty confident have had good experiences in the arts and have good knowledge and understanding of what the local arts sector needs. We'll ask them to grade the responses of each of the candidates to each of the questions, and we'll post that on social media as well. Also, this recording, Dan English, let's give a round of applause for Dan English. Is just one of those can-do people and has worked with EC3 many, many times. This will be available on our YouTube channel, and also Trent Radio is recording tonight and we'll be broadcasting it. We don't have their broadcast schedule yet. They were hit pretty hard by the storm, but we'll publish that schedule as soon as we have it, so you can also tune in on Trent Radio. Let's just give a shout out to Jill Stavely, who just manages to get through everything in such a great style. Steve Guthrie is our first moderator. Thanks for being here, Steve.
You're welcome.
Steve is well known to many of you as a great arts supporter in Peterborough, and probably most importantly for his work at Czech's Television as a reporter on many, many arts and local issues. Steve, just before I get you to ask your question, I'm going to formally introduce the candidates, starting with Jen Deck, and our speaking order tonight will be Jen, Robert, and Greg every time. They do cards, and I think it was the highest one, and highest number was Jen. Jen Deck is running for the Ontario NDP in Peterborough, Kawartha. She is an educator, a parent, a teacher, and a union leader. She's lived in Peterborough for the past 30 years, and she's been a teacher for 20 years. I just want to mention that Jen indicates in her bio that she worked at Monopate, and maybe like me, she survived many a canoe trip with our beloved Bruce Hodgins. I'm not quite sure how I managed to survive it, but I did. It's an enduring memory. Jen was a longtime board member of Camp Monopate in Temagami. She's raised her children here, and she's proud to reside in the community with her partner, Marcus. Thanks very much for being a good citizen and stepping forward in the election. Robert, we know well from Trent Radio and from Arthur newspaper. He's been an environmentalist for all of his life, has won awards for his work. I don't know if any of you remember his radio show, Environmental Soup, and we're really thrilled to have him here today. He holds a bachelor in environmental science from Trent University, so it's always lovely to welcome a Trent alumni to our events. And he served on the board of directors at Arthur and was Internal Affairs Commissioner for Arthur as well. So he's got some real traction in the community and community service. Thank you for being here, Robert. Greg Dempsey is representing the Liberal Party and running for the Liberal Party. Welcome, Greg. Greg grew up in Peterborough. He graduated from Adam Scott, did a little bit of curling, and worked with the Peterborough Labour Council, all distinguished occupations. He holds a BA from Bishop's University, a law degree from the University of Victoria, and a master's degree in international human rights law from Utrecht University in the Netherlands, and a certificate in International Indigenous Studies from Columbia University in New York. He's worked for global affairs in Canada, in Afghanistan, at the UN. He was posted in Kabul, did some work also recognizing the charitable work of Flora MacDonald. And I'll just tell a little quick story about Flora MacDonald, a Red Tory who was a great champion of the arts and definitely saved my butt when I was working at the National Gallery of Canada. When she was Minister of Culture, and if anybody wants to hear that story, they can ask me afterwards. Greg returned to Canada in 2018, leading consultations on a national strategy to engage men and boys in gender equality. He's been a special advisor on LGBTQ2+ issues for the government, and he plays golf.
Poorly.
No judgments here on golf. Thank you all three for being here tonight. We wish you the best of luck in your campaigns, and we're just delighted that you've taken time out to talk about the arts with all of us. So Steve.
Numerous studies by government agencies and professional business associations across the country and around the world have confirmed that the arts sector was one of the most seriously hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. Closed theaters and concert halls, canceled tours, and art exhibits and book launches meant crashing box office revenues and loss of artists' fees. Revenues, art production organizations, and hundreds of thousands of artists have suffered lost income, exposure, staff attrition, and a worry about audience, volunteer, and donor retention. Precarity becomes even more acute for individual artists in every discipline and stage of their careers. At the same time, research indicates that the arts play a critical role in helping people get through the pandemic, and was vital in the maintenance of good mental health in such stressful times. Locally, the arts contribute over $100 million in economic investment and spending. The BC government provided $125 million in COVID-19 relief and recovery funding to the BC Arts Council. Doug's Ford government provided $25 million to the Ontario Arts Council and controlled how it was spent, limiting contributions to grants to individual artists and providing organizational support only to those groups budgeted over $1 million. This hit the Peterborough arts community very hard. The question then is to each candidate, tell us how your government will support COVID-19 relief and recovery in the arts in the next 2 years. How will you and your government support the COVID-19 recovery efforts for arts organizations?
Thanks, Steve. I'm just going to do one clarification on the economic statistics. $10 million direct investment. So if we look at what arts organizations invest in the community through their budgets, it's $10 million. We use a multiplier established by Statistics Canada. I think it's 18 times. I'm looking at Gabe because I expect him to remember all of these things. So it's about $100 million in spin-off investment. So when they calculate the overall impact of the sector. Jen, if you could take us away on COVID-19 recovery efforts.
Thank you very much. My name is Jen. Tell me if you can hear me okay, because then I won't lean forward. I am not a performer, like many of you here.
Sound great.
Thank you. So, yes, COVID-19 hit everyone very hard, but it certainly hurt anyone with precarious work, and we know that many, many artists fall into that category. So, the NDP is committed to COVID recovery in a variety of ways. Some of them are arts focused and many of them are much more broadly distributed. So an example would be that the NDP would like to create a COVID-19 arts and culture recovery strategy, and that would focus on both operating budgets and marketing stabilization funds, emergency grants, and tax credits to cover PPE and retrofitting costs. And we also like to create direct supports for artists, live entertainment, and cultural workers. The Ontario Arts Council requires more funding, and we would like to create a permanent base of $110 million in 2022. And in comparison, in last year, the budget was $60 million, so almost a doubling of the Ontario Arts Council budget, and that would be permanent. And that is, many of the pieces of the NDP platform are quite universal, and one of them is stable, and reliable funding for a variety of social services and cultural treasures. And so yes, a stable budget, but also we just need to look at a lot of ways to help people get through the last 2 years. We've all really struggled and cost of living is high. So an example of that, of a more broad support, is that we would like to address cost of living through providing free dental care and mental health supports and prescriptions for all Ontarians. We know that many artists do not have the kind of permanent employment that gives them benefits access, and so those 3 pieces of healthcare that always should have been in healthcare, we want to now provide to all Ontarians free of cost. And we'd also like to, oh my, I've just had a little bit of a brain flip. Oh yes. We also need to really make all workers safe. We know that artists, many of them work in dangerous conditions because, in pursuit of their art, and injuries happen, and those people are not necessarily well protected by WSIB. WSIB has faults generally, but I believe that they have particular faults for people in the artistic community. So we need to strengthen WSIB so that workers have protections and are not at risk of losing their livelihoods and their passions through injury. Finally, I guess I'll just mention that employment safety and wellness is really important for all workers, and so we'd like to bring in something called Ontario Benefits, and that would be a benefits plan that would travel with the worker rather than with the job. So we know that artists often have to have side gigs and extra jobs and side hustles, and none of those cobble together to give permanent or full-time employment that usually generates benefits. So Ontario Benefits is going to be of great use to folks in the artistic community. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. You're right on time. Okay, up next, Robert.
Yes. Thank you for the question. The pandemic is still ongoing, so having paid sick days for all employees, 10 days of paid sick days, will help aid in locals' safety. And we need to learn lessons from this pandemic. So having the medical officer of health, an officer of the legislature, will help ensure that reduce the likelihood of future lockdowns, as well as reports from other officers of the legislature. And I would like to directly engage with artists to find out through them what supports they as a community and individuals want or need. And this engagement would occur in places that artists frequent through exploring different engagement measures, including through radio. The pandemic has also highlighted the importance of internet connectivity. So investments in broadband internet will continue. And as we learned through the storm, climate adaptation is important to go along with those investments. A basic income comes up a lot when researching what artists would like. So the Green government would implement a basic income, and we'll start with doubling the ODSP, Ontario Disability Support Program, which has been demonstrated need and has been used in other jurisdictions. And the Green government recognizes that a lot of artists work in the temporary and gig economies. So extending portable extended health benefits for workers in the gig economy that is tied to each employee, even if they change employment. And this is part of the Gig Workers Bill of Rights proposal. And there should be a meaningful consultation with people experiencing poverty and using existing social assistance programs. And as well, housing is a huge barrier for a lot of artists. So we will have direct financing and mortgage supports for nonprofits and organizations, land trusts that support that might support artists finding that housing. And anti-racism training and an anti-racism focus, staycation tax, and that's what the Green government would do to support artists.
Robert, thank you so much. You guys, by this point, have absolutely absorbed the 5-minute time limit. It's very impressive. Greg, you're up next on COVID-19 recovery and response. Thank you very much.
So thank you to Sue. Thank you to all of the organizers. My name is Greg Dempsey, he, him. I'm excited to be talking to you here from Treaty 20 Niitsitapi territory on the traditional territory of the Niitsitapi and Chippewa Nations. Before we begin, because I think this debate is really, really important, I do want to say that I am disappointed that our MPP is not here to talk to us tonight. I'm sure that he has a good reason not to be here himself. But I have seen reports in the media that his party has deliberately told candidates not to show up to local community debates like this one. This is the job interview. This is the job talking to people about our plans for the arts. And I think it does a disservice to our democracy to not show up and to tell you about his plans for the arts community in Peterborough. So that's the only time I will say that, but I think it's important to start with that. I am running here because I believe the arts community in Peterborough deserves a better, more caring provincial government. I'm running because I have the skills and the experience to be a great local MPP. And I'm running because I believe that you, the arts community, deserve a voice in Queen's Park that is going to fight for the funding for our community, fight for the recognition that you deserve, and fight for this community that we know is the beating heart of Peterborough. I mean, it really is. I've been running for this for the past year and a half. We've done numerous consultations with arts groups, with individual artists, with people in our community. I hosted an arts open house in February where a number of people in this room actually participated. I was really grateful for that. And we learned a lot of lessons about, as Sue said, the challenges of being in the arts community during the pandemic, but also just the incredible voice that arts have had to bring us through what has been 2 of the hardest years in my life and probably in everyone else's as well. So thank you for all of that. We heard in the consultations that I did and that my party did, 3 big things that the arts community were concerned about. So the first is performing arts spaces. We know, especially in Peterborough, there's a lack of places for people to perform or show their art. And we have in our platform, as directly as a result of those consultations with artists, a $50 million fund to create more art spaces all across Ontario. And I am dedicated to making sure that Peterborough Kawartha has every single cent of that funding for our community that we deserve. Because, yeah, I mean, this is an incredible place for artists, and we need that performance space. The second thing that we heard, and I heard very clearly from actually Kate Sir, who participated and gave such a moving statement about the importance of basic income. I'm really, really proud that our party has basic income in our platform. We need to restore that pilot. We paid for that data. Doug Ford promised that he would not cut it before the election, and then they got elected. It was one of the first things that they cut. We heard very clearly how important CERB was to the arts communities, how it allowed artists who otherwise had to worry about putting food on the table to really focus on their art, and how really important that was. And then when that funding went away, that people were really, really struggling. And I think that basic income holds an incredible amount of promise, not only for our community, but for the entire province. And I have pledged myself that the very first call I will make when I'm elected as MPP will be to ensure that we restore that basic income pilot, and that if I have anything to say about it, that it comes to Peterborough Kawartha. And the third thing were the cuts to the Ontario Arts Council and the Ontario Trillium Fund, and especially the meddling that the Doug Ford government has done with the boards of those organizations, favoring big organizations over individual artists. And those cuts are something we absolutely need to reverse. And we need to restore the independence of those organizations to make sure that individual artists can create their art without the kind of government interference that has become a hallmark of this provincial government. So I'll close there. Thanks, Sue.
Thank you very much, Greg. All right. That's a wrap on COVID-19 recovery and response. Steve, is there anything that you would like to go deeper on this issue?
Not at this point, no.
Not at this point, okay.
I think everyone recognizes the importance, and everyone has ideas how to fix it.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Thank you, candidates. I'm just going to see if anyone in the audience would like to ask a further question or press down at all on the question of what the different candidates and their parties would do with regard to COVID-19 response and recovery in the arts. We had a good round table with many, many arts organizations. EC3 did about this, and then a good discussion at the city's Arts, Culture and Heritage Advisory Committee, and we heard loud and clear from both individual artists and the leaders of particularly performing arts venues that from their point of view, COVID is very far from over, and recovery is still a long way away. There's still quite a long way to go, and we don't see at the moment anything coming forward from the Conservative government to take us through what we hope will be the final stages. So this is an important issue. If anybody wants to ask another question, please go ahead and step up to the mic. I think she's just changing. Peg McCracken is the Vice Chair of the Electric City Culture Council Board and the General Manager of the Peterborough Singers, who last night, because the power was out in their normal rehearsal hall, rehearsed for the next concert in the parking lot. Never say that the arts never say die. Or maybe it's always remember that the arts never say die.
Exactly.
Thanks very much, Steve, for your work. And I'm going to turn it over now to Nadine Changfoot from Trent University. Nadine, I think of her as a political studies person, because that's what my degree is in, so but she's really very, very erudite and an eclectic academic who works in the area of gender studies, in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. She's a member of the board of the Electric City Culture Council. She's a dancer, a filmmaker, and we're really delighted to have her here with us tonight. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Sue. Thanks, Sue, for inviting me to ask this pointed question. And Well, the question has been addressed partly. It'll just give you an opportunity to elaborate. So this has to do with the ongoing funding. The Progressive Conservative government slashed the budget of the Ontario Arts Council by 8%. And so this means that organizations have truly suffered cutbacks, no matter how outstanding their performance. And so the question is, what funding policies and programs do you propose to support the ongoing work of individual artists and arts organizations in Ontario? And then there's a second question. Will you work to establish a base budget of $110 million for the Ontario Arts Council in 2022, up from the current $60 million, to address both inflation and cutbacks?
Do you want to start again?
You do.
Okay.
It's the luck of the draw.
I actually have to confess that I made an error in my first answer, and so I need to use some of my time in this answer to address that, and that is in preparation for this and printing out sheets. I quoted your numbers in my answer, so I cannot
I don't
commit
mind that
and I've been sitting here feeling bad about it and wanting to jump in, but I didn't want to disrespect my colleagues at the mics. So I apologize for that error. Having said that, I will say that it is absolutely true that the NDP is committed to stable funding. And I'll give you an example that I have observed. I went to see the Theatre Guild recently, and we were talking about how theatre guilds need, the theatre guilds do amazing work. They work with community members, they work with young people. They are a taste of the arts for many people. That is their way into the arts, is through a theatre guild. And they are largely staffed by volunteers, but they require a permanent space. They require storage for props and costumes. What are those things you wear? And so if the funding isn't stable, we lose the wealth of knowledge and skills and abilities of those volunteers and sometimes hopefully staff who have to leave to go and do other things, or the space is no longer available and so the storage disappears and all the equipment and props and such are lost. I come from education, and that's more my lived experience. And my experience in the last 4 years has been that the government will sometimes announce money, but they announce it really, with no notice, no time to plan for it, and with a limited window of time in which to spend it. And good decisions just can't be made in that kind of fashion. So it's really important that we give stable, consistent funding, even if I can't put an exact number to that. I also want to say that we will increase the funding to the Ontario Arts Council, and we'd like to restore the Indigenous Culture Fund. We need to increase festival funding and work closely with performing artists to make sure that the sector gets back on track. We need to put more energy into screen-based industry by providing competitive tax credits, strong support for cutting-edge production facilities, and a plan to bring more jobs to communities, including Northern Ontario. We'll simplify the Ontario Computer Animation and Special Effects Tax Credit and increase the funding for the Community Museum Operations Grant. We will increase funding for brick and mortar libraries and digital library services and prioritize Ontario authors and publishers in school curricula to help promote local writers and support Ontario's publishing industry. All in all, throughout all of the NDP plan, there is always interwoven through this the sense of equity and working to protect the environment and address our climate challenge. Myself, I have a women's studies degree from Trent, back when it was called Women's Studies. And even though we didn't have the word of intersectionality back in the 90s, in the early 90s, I really feel like that was a concept that was woven throughout all my courses, and it's something that I've taken very, very seriously in my life and in my practice. So this seems like the NDP's values when it comes to the arts seem to be very much in alignment with mine of equity and environmentalism.
See, Gabe is showing us the 1 minute mark. Are you okay, Jen?
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you.
very, very much. All right. Robert, you're up next on support for the Ontario Arts Council. Primarily, that's the question, right? Nadine?
Yes, restoring the funding.
Restoring the funding.
From the past.
I'll just give a little sidebar, picking up on what Jen said about the Theatre Guild. So the Theatre Guild is an amateur organization, very much coming out of the beginnings of the independent arts in Canada, developing theatre. For many, many years, it's played a crucial, theatre guilds in many communities have played a really crucial role, supported by something called Theatre Ontario, that provided professional development workshops, grants, and when the cutbacks came to the Ontario Arts Council, they did cut funding to Theatre Ontario, which was too bad, but very understandable that they put a priority on professional arts and arts organizations. But in our community, both professional and paraprofessional and amateur organizations are all really important to the vitality of our sector. Sorry for the sidebar there. It's just something that I'm really sure a lot about. Robert, on the Ontario Arts Council, what is the Green Party thinking?
Yes, yeah, thank you for the question. The Green Government will restore investments in the Ontario Arts Council and I'm not sure if that includes inflation or not. I have to do more research into that. And the Ontario Tourism Foundation, 5 million into the Indigenous Cultural Fund, and decrease land taxes payable for buildings in which below market rental opportunities are available to creative and social enterprises, a stabilization fund for the nonprofit sector, and developing a strategy with nonprofits and cooperatives to drive local job creation. We recognize that a lot of art is inspired by the natural environment. So there is funding to protect the natural environment, which is Indigenous-led. And then funding for nonprofit for affordable housing, and anti-racism training, and all programs and services, as well as for individual legislators, an anti-racism directorate to reduce barriers faced by individual artists and reduce systematic racism. And providing new channels to provide input for MPPs and investing in libraries and recognizing that the artists are listened to more than scientists. We know that they have a role to play in educating the public. And the Green Party will lower carbon emissions 5 years faster than other parties. And that's one of the issues that the arts community is concerned about. And I know that those, in the budget, those programs that are listed as other ways to address climate change. And that's something that I'll look further into to see if there's anything specific to the arts community. And thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And Greg, coming up next on Ontario Arts Council.
Yeah, thank you, Sue. I think implicit in your question, I want to say, I believe that the greatest threat to the arts community in Peterborough, Kawartha is the Doug Ford Conservative government. These budget cuts that our local community have suffered through in the name of cost cutting and with no real connection or consultation with the arts community have really been devastating. And so I want to say first off that I am committed to reversing all of those cuts to all of those organizations. So you mentioned the Ontario Arts Council, the Trillium Foundation, cuts to Theatre Ontario, the Music Fund, the Indigenous Culture Fund. We are committed to reversing every single one of those cuts and increasing funding for those organizations because they do such incredible, important work here in our community. Through this process of running for the nomination, I've spoken to dozens of individual artists, and they have also spoken about the challenges that are involved in individual artists getting access to grants themselves. And so the way that this government has restructured funding, it's made it much easier for larger organizations, especially large organizations based in Toronto, to get access to these culture funds, and has made it harder for artists in Peterborough to get access to them, and made it nearly impossible for individual artists to be able to have the creative freedom to apply for grants without first working through some donor organization or a community foundation. And nothing against EC3, it's a wonderful organization, but I believe that individual artists deserve the opportunity to apply directly for grants themselves and to be able to have access to that funding. And so that is something that I am also committed to, is changing those regulations to make sure that individual artists have the opportunity to apply for grants and restoring all of the cuts that we saw from the Doug Ford provincial government. The other thing that I want to say is that I cannot claim to be an amazing artist. I do not have the talent for it. But what I can say is that I am very good at government. I am very good at grants, at making sure that our community gets the funding that we deserve in all of these important areas. I cannot wait to be a champion for the Peterborough Kawartha arts community. I mean, it is the beating heart of our community. Sue, you mentioned the economic drivers. I mean, that's important, but really, I think what you spoke to at the start is just making sure that our stories get told. And that's something else that I am very good at, is that I have worked in lots of diverse spaces and have had the honor of speaking to and representing vulnerable communities, 2S, LGBTQ plus communities, and others who really are underrepresented, unfortunately. And their voices, more than anything else, are underrepresented. And so I cannot wait to make sure that their voice is my voice, and that I get to work at Queen's Park every single day to make sure that our community gets the arts and culture funding that we deserve, and that our government is properly supporting the amazing, incredible work that our arts community does every single day in this running. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Greg. Just want to clarify something, because I was just trying to follow along what you said about individual artists. So just to be clear, individual artists can apply to the Ontario Arts Council for grants. The only program that I know of where people had to go through, had to hook up with a charitable organization was an emergency fund, the Peterborough Arts Alive Fund. So community foundations, which are governed by the federal government, can only give money to charities. So we were really proud to be able to match everybody who wanted to apply in that program up with a charity who would act as an umbrella for them, because we're not incorporated as a charity yet. so thanks to the city of Peterborough and the hard advocacy work of many city councillors and many people in the arts community, next week we'll launch the first ever in Peterborough grants to individual artists program. So people will be able to municipal level, which is something that we're seeing all across the province now in London and Kingston, and we're very, very excited about that. Thank you all for those answers to a complicated question. We're very lucky in Ontario. I've worked internationally quite a bit, and people are always a little bit stunned at the public support for the arts in Canada, and we respect and appreciate that, but it's really rewarding to hear all of you feel so strongly about the OAC and the Indigenous Fund and many other funds that were cut over the last 4 years. Nadine, do you have a follow-up question yourself?
Well, I'm kind of curious how, if elected, how will you, I'm just curious if you could provide a bit more detail on your vision of how you're going to stay in touch with the arts organizations and artists to convey concerns of artists and arts organizations to your leadership.
Same word? Okay. Well, I am an educator, and I know how education works, and I'm good at communicating and solving problems and advocating. I'm not a politician, so I don't know what the avenues are. But what I can tell you is that when I moved to Peterborough 30 years ago, I don't consider myself much of an artist. I can carry a tune very well, but aside from that, that's kind of the end of it. But you don't have, it always upsets me when I hear people say, well, as somebody who has a daughter, I care about women's issues, or as somebody, with a gay kid, I care about gay issues. Like, you shouldn't have to be an artist or be, in there to appreciate the effect it has on our world. And when I came to Peterborough and discovered how rich and vibrant the artistic community was, that's good for everyone. It was good for my children who were awash in music and drama, and it's good for people of diverse backgrounds to find their voice and their expression and communicate and teach. And so my commitment is that I will listen. And how will I do that? Well, my door will always be open, and I have deep roots in this community. So I will not be a closed door kind of person. I never have been in my job where I represent my occasional teachers, my 800 members. They always have access to me, and that would be the way that I would go forward. I will learn this job. The nuts and bolts of it are learnable. What I bring to this is a commitment and a care and a compassion for the people of Peterborough and Kawartha, and a commitment to the value of artistic expression and what artists bring to our world.
Thank you, Jen. I'm going to go ahead, Greg. We'll mix it up a little bit in this Q&A.
I'm happy to. Sorry, Robert. So in the process of running for this nomination and through this electoral process, we've posted dozens of open houses that have been open to the entire community. As I mentioned, we hosted an open house on the arts, but also on all sorts of different topics, and also just general open houses so that people could feel that they could bring their feedback directly to me. That's something that I'm committed to continuing, to make sure that everybody in our community can reach out to me, that they know that I'm listening directly to their concerns. There's always something new to learn. I have had the privilege, like I said, of speaking to so many people in our community who brought different perspectives, knowledge, ideas to me, and I will blatantly confess to have stolen a lot of those great ideas and to have advocated for them in our platform. And something that I'm really proud of, for instance, is that in our platform we've committed to a $20 million grant for local community 2S LGBTQ+ organizations, and that was something that we heard very directly at one of our open houses, and something that is near and dear to my heart and is now in our platform because of the advocacy that I did. And then the second point that I think is important is that it's not just about having community organizations speak to me, that's great. We need to make sure that artists and our community get to speak directly to the decision makers in the Ontario government. And that means setting up meetings with the bureaucrats and the people who are writing the proposals and deciding on the proposals so that they can hear directly from you why this is so important for our community, why the arts programs are everything to Peterborough Kawartha. And that's something else that I will bring, and I intend to be very good at that job when I'm elected on June 2nd.
Thank you, Greg, very much. Robert?
Yeah, this is a good question. I will look at innovative solutions to meeting with artists, including through radio, and going to festivals after seeking permission to do so, and engaging with artists where they're at, the Poetry Slam, First Fridays, and other locations. I've learned that from watching how other engagement happens, that it's effective. Having one of those walking postal boards can be an option, and meeting people in cafes as well, and then cold calling, traditional networking. Those are all avenues that I would explore to engage with specifically the arts community, but and other community groups as well.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks to all of you for your answer to that question. We heard some really creative ideas and genuine commitment to keep your connections with the community going in your work. Are there any questions from our home audience here? Emily.
Thanks everybody for coming out tonight. I'm Emily Martin, I'm the General Manager of Showplace. So I loved your answers, that's amazing. My question is more as it relates to the Ontario Arts Council and Trillium when it comes to large venues, because a lot of the stuff we're talking about tonight is project-based for artists, which is fine. It's really important, obviously, because we rely on the artists to fill our spaces as well. My question is more around support for these venues, and I know, Greg, you touched on it really well about the importance of space in these communities and space for artists to perform. I can speak from experience, it's very expensive to run a venue like this, and we receive zero support from the province to help run these venues. We completely rely on federal support and municipal support. And I'm wondering, and these venues aren't built to turn a profit. That's the reality. We're here to support the community. We're here to attract the doctors and the lawyers, the engineers and the professionals to our community as well, which always supports and creates that economic spin-off. So we don't receive Trillium funding, we don't receive Ontario Arts Council because it has to be project-based, which isn't what we do. We're here to run this venue. And what's your party's plans to help support these large venues and make sure that we are able to stay in this community?
Well, I can speak to the fact that the NDP wants to invest in small and medium businesses, and although this is a big venue, and although it would be considered a big operation in the arts community, it would still fall under the umbrella of small to medium business, and so that is one of the ways that we want to support you. We also want to do things like provide you with retrofit money if you want to, improve your ventilation, or if you want to green up your operation and get your, so we have incentives the NDP has always been the party for the people and the party of the workers, and so we want to invest in people, and in, you guys are, you know, if we're not for the big organizations, we would consider you the small organizations, and we are committed to supporting you in a variety of ways.
Thanks, Jen. Great.
Thank you, absolutely. And this is something I think is really, really important in our platform, and is a result of having spoken directly, not just to venues, but also to individual artists that share your concern about space, especially here in Peterborough, Kawartha. And so yes, the $50 million funding that is in the platform is not just for new spaces, it's for refurbishment of spaces, it's also for us to perhaps buy spaces that are struggling and really need the government to come in and provide that funding so that they will stay open, because you know the realities of how hard it is to keep this space running, especially as we're still dealing with the after effects of COVID. And so that's really, really important. And what I will just say is that that's in the platform because of the advocacy that individual artists and the arts community have done. And so you should not be thanking or excluding me, like I should be thanking you for providing that feedback and for being such a great voice for performing and other artists. Yeah. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Robert?
Yeah, thank you. So we will provide small businesses financial support to fund a program and paid sick days, decrease land taxes payable for buildings in which below market rental opportunities are available to creative and social enterprises, and develop a strategy with nonprofit and cooperative sectors to drive local job creation, and that should include some of the venues in that discussion, because a lot of them, the big venues, do support the artists. And yeah, that's my response.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Emily, thank you for that very important question. I know I'm the past chair of the Alliance of Arts Councils of Ontario, and we lobbied very hard for the Ontario Arts Council to provide COVID-19 funding to venues, but that was a one-time only thing. So it's a long-term systemic issue to be resolved. Thank you, everyone. We'll get rolling again. Maybe you were expecting singing and dancing, but we're very serious tonight. This is about our livelihood. This is about the future. And I want to welcome the extraordinary poet laureate of Peterborough, Sarah Lewis. Sarah is a very well recognized and well respected, and in fact award-winning spoken word artist. She lives at Curve Lake and is a member of the Ojibwe and Cree Nation. Sarah, raise your hand here quick. Don't lose too much. Her career is just taken off. My contract ended. Your contract ended. Typical Peterborough story. Sarah is a mum and a very active member of her community. I just would like to say she's been an absolute delight to work with as poet laureate. This was our first go at this program, and she's made it easy and rewarding, and we're delighted to see her here tonight in a new role. So thank you, Sarah, and please take it away with your question. And remember that we're reversing the order in the responses.
Okay, Anine, hello everyone. So many artists living in Peterborough and Peterborough County, including Curve Lake and Hiawatha First Nations, have experienced decades of systemic barriers, discrimination, exclusion, and marginalization in relationship to arts education, creative funding, and representation in leadership and decision-making. So my question is, what actions would you and your government take to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion for marginalized, including artists with disabilities, deaf and hard of hearing artists, and racialized artists, including BIPOC, so that's Black, Indigenous, people of color, particularly Indigenous artists in our area, and 2S LGBTQ+ artists?
Okay, that's a great question. I wrote it, so of course I'm very attached to it. And I really thank you and respect you for being able to say all those acronyms so smoothly and so easily. I shouldn't make fun of such a serious question, I'm sorry.
I say them a lot.
You rolled right off your tongue very nicely. And we're going to start with Greg this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. This question is very close to my heart. I've made my career in social justice and human rights work, and we know that arts can be an incredible force for good, can be an incredible force for cultural change and acceptance and positivity, but when racialized artists, Indigenous artists, artists of color, marginalized artists are excluded from these funding programs and excluded from important cultural discussions, then we are no further ahead in the inclusion efforts that we need to make. So I'm really glad that we're talking about it. So our platform recognizes that we still have numerous challenges and that the Ontario Arts Council and the Trillium Foundation still need work to be accessible to everyone, including grassroots organizations, including Indigenous organizations, including BIPOC organizations. And so we're committed to ensuring that they are more accessible. We also have a plan to set aside $5 million for organizations that represent Black voices in the community. And I mentioned before that we have a specific commitment of $20 million in funding for 2S LGBTQ+ organizations as well, including arts organizations, which is going to be really important. Because unfortunately, we've seen that the broad grant programs, while they are amazing and important, sometimes we need specific granting programs. And that's why, I mean, we spoke previously about the cuts to the Indigenous Culture Fund as well. Those are really devastating, and so I'm proud that we're going to be restoring those, but also adding these other programs to ensure that we're focusing on the voices of every single artist in our community so that they can succeed and tell their stories and make sure that we hear their voices. We're also committed to making sure that all of our arts programming is seen through an equity lens. So that includes not just the funding, but how we make policy decisions. Our entire platform, including the arts part, was put through an equity lens. It included consultations with marginalized and vulnerable communities. I think it is a really, really progressive plan, and I think that it shows how much consultation we did with the people who are most affected, the artists who are telling their stories, the people on the ground who are experiencing these issues every single day. And I think it's going to make a really, really big difference to ensuring that we hear those voices as we were talking about.
Thank you, Greg. Robert. Or is it John?
Right, yeah. Yes. So this land has been stolen from Indigenous peoples. So it is important to empower Indigenous-led efforts in the arts community and in land conservation, and to strengthen relationships with Indigenous nations. Recognizing that intergenerational trauma has resulted in suicides and mental health impacts, a Green government will have 10% of the health budget specific to mental health, and has committed to the recommendations on the Mortal Missing Women in Goals inquiry. The Green Party, and as well as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The Green Party will double ODSB and Ontario Walks. In addition, it will require the Ontario Public Service to commit to eliminate racism and discrimination, conduct random external audits, data collection and reporting, and establish a safe harassment and discrimination reporting system for staff. And I would, as an MPP, I would advocate that this includes the Alps. And a basic income will also be helpful because of the discrimination impacts Indigenous and racialized individuals the most. And there will be funding to support the 2 LGBTQIA+ youth groups, and restored funding for the Indigenous curriculum program, and work with Indigenous educators to develop a curriculum on colonization, residential schools, treaties, and Indigenous histories and experience, as well as funding for Black-owned businesses, or people who are Black or racialized. And reaching out with racialized individuals directly.
Thank you, Robert, very, very much. I'm just keeping my eye glued to Gabe here because he's our timekeeper and we are running a little bit behind. Sarah, did you have a follow-up question? Oh, sorry, Jen, I'm so sorry.
But I was going to change the order.
Forgive me, I should have changed the order. Linear thinker, can you
That's
take
okay.
her?
I can speak up, it's okay. But thank you, everyone. Representation matters. And to properly address this, I think we need to start from the ground up. Education is underfunded. And when I talk about education, I'm talking primary, secondary, post-secondary education is underfunded. And education, school is where children first explore art. They first interact with educators that have artistic skills and talents and can nurture their expression. And teachers are working on a very, very tight budget right now. They are worn out and they are stretched thin. And we know that when we cut education, one of the first things that gets cut is arts education. So I worry about the children of today and tomorrow because they are missing out on the exploration and the discovery of their own voice. And representation matters because I met a child once in a school and a Black teacher came in and he was surprised and he said to me, I didn't know that teachers could be Black. We need representation of all equity-seeking groups in our education force so that kids can look up and see a teacher who is 2S LGBTQ, or a teacher who is disabled, or a teacher who is Indigenous, or a teacher whose first language is not English, so that kids can see themselves in their educators, but also to give them the freedom to explore their own individualities. I've worked with a number of kids in the trans community in school, and school can be a very cold and harsh place for them. And many of them find their expression and their voice through the arts, and they find their community and their refuge from the artistic community. And we need to nurture that right from the beginning. Right from the beginning of when kids are just first exploring their personalities and who they are and what's important to them. And we need to give them that space. And I truly believe that in addition to all of these things that we've been talking about tonight, putting commitment into arts and culture is of course valid, and it's a moneymaker. It's a job generator. It has all of these tangible benefits. But I really truly believe that we will not do our society we will not find our peace until we give children the ability to live and grow in a place that's safe and in a place that's welcoming and affirming. And as somebody who is themselves in the 2S LGBTQ community and whose children have themselves questioned their own identities, I know that living and growing up in the school system can kill kids. And we need to protect them, we need to nurture them and give them space to explore themselves and find their creativity. And we can put all of the stuff at the top end in place, and I want to do that stuff, but we really need to work at that grassroots level. And we'll see in the next 10 and 20 years, we'll see that blossoming.
Thank you, Jen. Very serious answers to a very serious question. Sarah, did you have a follow-up?
I did, yes. Just given the amount of time that we have, I don't know if I have a lot of follow-up questions, but I mean, I have one important one. So this is taken from the Provincial Arts and Culture Coalition's policy priorities. And would you say that you echo, because I know you mentioned, there was mention of $5 million for community organizations that work on representing Black voices. I'm just wondering if that mission is echoed to the Indigenous community by committing to truth and reconciliation in arts and culture. More specifically, will you support the establishment of a permanent $10 million annual fund for Indigenous artists, cultural leaders, organizations, groups, and collectives that is designed and managed by Indigenous artists?
Very important question, Sarah, thank you. The 10 million mark, I think, is something that we really want to highlight because that is the funding that was previously designated for that fund. I'm not even sure the fund actually had time to get off the ground, but I wish I could remember. But that's the amount of money the previous government had hoped to invest. So I'm just going to ask people to just very quickly respond to the idea of the Indigenous Cultural Fund. Several of you have touched on it, but in response to Sarah's request for a $10 million restoration of that fund, and great, if you could read, that would be great.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. I'll say one thing quickly, Sue.
Okay.
It is up to all of us, especially those of us who are non-Indigenous like myself, to walk the hard and long road of reconciliation together. That means being inspired by and listening to the TRC's calls to action. It means following the recommendation of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's report. I am committed to that work. I think that Indigenous voices continue to be underrepresented in arts and culture, and if it's up to me, I think we should do even better than that $10 million funding. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Robert, Indigenous Culture Fund.
The Green Party is in support of the 5 million, reinstating 5 million, but I will have discussions within my party because I do believe that 10 million is a good achievable goal.
Thank you very much. And Jen?
I believe the answer is yes, because I'm looking at the exact wording from the platform, and it says the NDP government will restore and
questions from our in-house audience about this particular issue for the candidates? Seeing none, as Councillor Rial always says to me. I'd like to go forward with our final question and our final moderator from the fabulous Ziysah, who I've known for many years in many capacities as a director of ReFrame Film Festival, as someone very involved in the Peterborough Poetry Slam Collective, and as a wonderful community member. We're really happy and very proud to have them here tonight. Ziysah, please.
Thank you, Sue. Thanks for having me. Good evening, everyone. This is my first time speaking on a microphone indoors in 2 years. Feels really good. It also feels great to be in Showplace. I was very familiar running up and down the stairs over and over. All right, thank you all for being here and for sticking around for the fourth and final question. It has to do with support for smaller municipalities and rural arts practice. In the past 10 years in particular, we have identified a growing number of serious and successful artists trying to advance their practice here, move here to live and work, and try and stay here to continue to work in the arts. Spiraling rents, poor official plans, restricted bases for corporate fundraising, weak infrastructure in communications and transportation all pose very serious challenges despite growing financial support from the municipality and a surge in interested art lovers and supporters. So the question for you is, what special initiatives might you propose to encourage and support sustainable artistic practice in smaller urban centers such as Peterborough and arts activity in rural areas? Will you actively advocate for programs and funding that increase appropriate capital funding, expansion of digital capacities, and other rural-specific infrastructure needs?
Thank you, Ziysah. All right, so we're going to change the order, and that means, Greg, you're starting to answer the question about smaller municipalities and rural arts practice and how your government might support their development and sustainability.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. We know that small communities, medium-sized communities, places like Peterborough, Kawartha have really important, unique stories to tell. And what we've seen, especially through the pandemic, is that there really has been a focus on large urban centers, and I think there's a lot of stories that need to be told from Peterborough, Kawartha that have been lost because the current Conservative government has really focused on those large organizations and providing grants to them and not providing the kind of support that our community needs and deserves because we have our unique stories to tell. So I spoke about some of the funding proposals that we have done. So I am committed to making sure that Peterborough Kawartha gets every single cent of funding that we deserve in these proposals. Not just in the $50 million for performing art spaces, but in the Trillium Fund, the Arts Council, and everything. It is really, really helpful, and many people in the room probably know, to have an MPP who has your back and who is going to help and support and push these funding proposals that we need in our community. And I do believe that that is something that the Peterborough Kawartha arts community has been lacking, is that voice in the Ontario government to make sure that you get the funding that you absolutely deserve. So I'm looking forward to doing that. I think we also need to make sure that we have inclusive policies that includes rural voices as much as urban voices. So we spoke about Peterborough, but the riding's pretty big, and there are incredible artists at Curve Lake, of course, in North Kawartha, in Trent Lakes, that, you know, because of the pandemic, for a lot of them, have been able to move out to the really beautiful parts of our riding, but have had to give up these kinds of supports that they would have had access to, even in Peterborough. And so I'm committed to making sure that every single corner of the riding has access to the supports, knows that we will be an absolute open door and advocating for them, because we know that unless we ensure that the stories of our community are told, especially by the arts community, then we could get lost in the shuffle. And so I'm going to make sure that that doesn't happen and to be a voice for the artists of Peterborough.
Okay. Robert, you're up next.
Thank you. Yes. So I hold housing specifically mentioned. So if there is a arts and cultural land or community trust created, the Green Party would partner with them and nonprofits to support permanently affordable housing geared towards artists. And support would also include direct financing as well as mortgage support for those organizations. And as they are non-profits create most of the affordable housing in Ontario. And a basic income is also a huge request from the artists. And then working with municipalities in the area to create shared resources for the small museums and libraries, and a suggestion investing in something like a suggestion box for museums and art galleries so that the public can have some input into some of the ideas that turns into a display. Yeah, and then with radio is something that can reach a lot of the rural areas as well as internet. And then discussions specifically with artists and the community to see where their priorities are in terms of investments.
Thank you, Robert. Gosh, I have to say, the last few days with the storm, I've been longing for the days when we had the CB radio group. I don't know how many of you remember that. The municipality used to support a big network of people with CB radios because my phones were all, I had the stupid 5. You have to have power for your landline. I'm not joking, it's scary. Jen?
Oh, Marcus took a CB radio course last year. I'm totally with you.
All right, we have to get a subcommittee going.
Yeah. I'm going to sound like an old saw. I did talk about a whole bunch of the ways that we want to address cost of living in my first answer, so I'm not going to go back to that. But I want to talk about rural and small communities and how we need to invest in the infrastructure, and that includes transportation, healthcare, school, and other facilities in our rural and small communities and our northern communities. We want to double the Northern and Rural Community Fund, and we need to, I really wish that I had mentioned something in my previous question, so I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to steal a little time to talk about it. When I was talking about representation, one of the things that the NDP is committed to doing is creating a position on school board trustees as an Indigenous voice. Because we know that our school board trustees make a lot of really important decisions about directions. And I also just wanted to say we can talk all we want about equity, and we can put really nice looking policies on paper. As somebody who has been fighting as a labor activist for 8 years, I know how easily those words on paper can be disregarded if the actual practices are not designed with equity in mind. And so that's something that I've really struggled with, and I'm very cautious when I hear talk about embracing equity and using equity lens. It really does come down to, and I come back to representation, we need to have different lived experiences in our decision-making capacities. Otherwise, it's just too easy to talk the talk and not actually know what needs to be fixed and how to get there. So I did want to make sure that I mentioned that. Broadband, it's outrageous that in 2022 we still have insufficient broadband. I joke, I have trouble getting through a Zoom call, and I live in downtown Peterborough. So if we want our artists, our computer, digital, our digital artists and our music, I'm not a tech person, but all the techie stuff, if we want them to move to the small communities where the cost of living is lower so that they can do that work, we need to provide them with stable and reliable broadband. And we've had 20 years of promises of bringing rural broadband, and we still don't have it. So the NDP is very much committed to doing that. That is an equity item, and we really discovered that 2 years ago when we had the first shutdown and kids were sent home and we had to do virtual learning. And we really discovered how insufficient our broadband system was. And once again, as it always happens, it was the most vulnerable members of the community that were worst impacted by what was a crisis. And we're seeing it again with that storm, right? We see that our unhoused folks didn't have shelter, and the little shelter they had has been lost. We can all whinge and moan that we had to throw out the food in our fridges, but there are people that suffered far more greatly. So we really do need to address the basic infrastructure and cost of living issues if we want artists to be able to have the freedom to put their energy towards their craft.
Thank you very much, Jen. Thank you all for your answers to that question, because it's very unique to this riding. I thought it's very important to address that issue. Ziysah, do you have any follow-ups of your own?
I always have questions, so I'll do one.
Okay, thanks.
Just out of all, there was a lot mentioned in the preamble, and I just wanted to pick out a couple items that I haven't heard too much specific information on, so maybe I'll give you a chance to share what's in your platform and also your personal. Dance break, 1 minute dance break. Still going, come on.
We always welcome some music and dance. Sorry to interrupt.
The radio listeners might be confused. Or is this being edited? There was a cell phone interruption that we decided to use as a dance break.
Dan will take care of that.
So one is transportation. If you have ideas about transportation in Peterborough and the surrounding area, it's been a big issue. People using public transit in the city, but also getting to and from the city from the rural areas. And I think that would be a big barrier for the arts, especially as gas prices have gone up. The second one is about rent. Housing has been mentioned several times, but what about the spiraling rents that have hit Peterborough possibly the hardest in the province? How would you address that so that people can maybe soon it won't even be an advantage to move here from Toronto, so what do we do about that?
Who would like to start? Frank?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. So on transit, I mean, this is certainly something I've been speaking to everybody at the doors about. You've probably heard about our plan to make transit cost $1 across the entire province. That would be every single bus in the city of Peterborough, the link to Lakefield and Curve Lake, the GO bus to Oshawa, and the GO train all the way to downtown Toronto cost $1. It's going to make a huge difference for folks who are on fixed incomes. It's going to help people who are struggling with the price of gas. And it's going to be a huge revenue generator for the city of Peterborough and for the other municipalities that run transit systems, because we will replace every single lost dollar because of the low fares. Also, of course, we know that the bus system is still not working the way that we want it to work. We need more routes, we need better service. That's going to be part of the plan, and we have specific funding allocated, $375 million allocated to increase the routes. I was somebody who used the Greyhound bus to get from Peterborough to Ottawa to Toronto, up north. Yeah, indeed, and I think that that was a real loss for our community, and I think the province has a role to play in trying to get that regional transit back for our community. And then you spoke about rents, and finding a safe, affordable place to live has become incredibly difficult for everybody in Peterborough, Kawartha. So I've spoken to municipal councillors in every part of the riding, and it's remarkable how similar people's concerns are in Apsley, in Buckhorn, in Ennismore, in Peterborough. The rents are absolutely crazy. So as a first step, of course, we've committed to reinstating rent control across the board.
Just going to interrupt you for 1 second. If we could keep your response focused on the transportation piece.
Oh, I asked about both.
Did you hear about both?
Yeah,
I'm
sorry.
Okay.
It's like in 2 questions in one, I guess.
No one sees that. Sorry, go ahead. Get us on the housing.
I mean, yeah, I think, we could talk about housing all night. We could have one debate specifically on housing.
We were supposed to.
Well, indeed. And so, yes, I mean, it's an incredible problem, both for renters and for people who are looking to break into the housing market. I think we have a great housing plan, and I'll just encourage you to go to my website and look it up. I won't take any more of the time soon.
Okay, Jen?
Sure. So I grew up in Toronto. I started in Toronto and I came here to Trent to go to university in 1992. So I feel like the 2 extremes of transit experience. It's a tricky one though, because Peterborough, even though it's a big, we think of it as a big town, it's big compared to all the rural areas around us. It's still a small city. And so there just are limitations to how good a transit system can get. So, we have to realize that. I think that in talking to Corey McLeod, who's the president of the Transit Union local, he talked to me about some of the struggles of trying to improve transit in Peterborough. And what it really came down to was who's making the decisions, because from his perspective, the change from the hub and spoke model to the modified, whatever it's called now, it doesn't work for riders and it doesn't work for drivers. It's really quite an awful system. They're working 12 hours and getting paid for 8. Can you imagine? It's so terrible. And it's not accessible either. So there was actually infrastructure money that was dedicated to Peterborough, and all the pads were put in all throughout the city that made the stops accessible. And then the routes were changed, and so now only of 800 stops, only 400 are accessible. So, I think we need to get creative, and I'm not the answer haver, but I talk to people who've thought about stuff a lot, and I'll use this as an example that I believe this is true also of the arts community. I believe you guys have the answers and the creativity to come up with the solutions, and my job is to support you and your ideas. But when I talked to Corey, he was saying, if we just went back to the old model and just had more buses running, then we'd get the best of both worlds. We'd get a good hub and spoke system that actually really benefits the downtown core. And I'd love to see bike racks on all the buses so that people could stick their bike on, get to the downtown core, and then finish the trip on their bikes rather than having to take a connector. How you do that in rural places, I really don't know, but we've had creative solutions. We had a bus that was going from Wakefield to Peterborough. People use that all the time. That was really good. You need to find the solutions that are going to work for the community, though. Corey was telling me that there's this on-demand bus that just basically drives around Peterborough and doesn't pick anybody up because it doesn't actually work. Some bubble had made this idea and went, this is going to be great, but it didn't actually address the need. So I think we need to be creative in our solutions, and we can try things out and pilot things, but ultimately we need to actually talk to the people, the actual stakeholders. Who's using the transit, and what do they need, and then let's find the solutions. As for rent, we definitely need to get back the tribunal where landlords and tenants could air their grievances and have somebody make a decision, an arbitrator make a decision. Those have been, they used to be in person. I can imagine that having them in person allows for more communication, so we want to bring that back. We also need to bring back rent control, and we need to stop the process of rent evictions where landlords can evict their tenants under the guise of renovations and then jack up the prices. Rent control was designed to allow for property owners to improve their buildings and allow the rent to go up by a reasonable amount. And that whole regulation's just had the whole cap taken off of it. We need to tamp that all down. And that's good for landlords too, ultimately, because good landlords, you know, we've all had good landlords and we've all had bad landlords. And the good landlords need the protections so that the bad ones can't undercut them. That's my belief. So that's my transit and my rent thoughts. Thank you. And yeah, it would have been, I'm so sad that we didn't get to have the United Way debate and talk more deeply about housing, because it is clearly, it's one of the biggest issues and one of the biggest barriers for everyone, but particularly young people.
Thank you very much. Robert, housing and transportation.
Thank you. Yeah, so in terms of transportation, we have to freeze urban boundaries and increase density along transit corridors and throughout the municipalities by addressing the missing middle. Because the hub and spoke model doesn't work in Peterborough, the city, because we keep expanding into the suburbs. And I know that the changes have been abrupt, and that's an issue as well. We will restore 50% of funding for transit to municipalities, and this will help increase frequency of buses in both rural and urban areas. I started my campaign writing the link, and then in terms of other transportation measures, like reducing fares in half for the first 3 months to address the high cost of gas, electrifying transportation, and this will help save municipalities even further money. And then I also support the expansion of the on-demand, and recognizing that a lot of people don't have cell phones or from a generation that doesn't use cell phones. We have a large segment of the population that is 65 plus. So addressing, going back to pay phones at key locations might address that, and expanding the service across the region instead of like half the city. In terms of rent control, making it more difficult to have rent evictions, and addressing the missing middle, so we don't have to choose between a single-family home or a 6-story working with nonprofits, which I mentioned in previous answers, will help address the affordability. And specifically, we have to also have supportive housing as well. Yeah, and those are some of the platform specific to transportation and rent.
Thank you very much, Robert. It's really important to understand how those connective issues work in terms of supporting the arts community, so we really appreciate your thoughts and the time you've taken to address those. Ziysah, thank you. So are there any questions from the audience on this particular issue?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay. Thank you all for answering those tough questions, for taking the time to respond to them in advance with written responses. We are going to welcome your closing statements of 5 minutes each. I'm going to ask as much as possible that you keep them focused on the arts. And I'm just going to quickly, before I do that, say thank you very much to our moderators tonight, to Sarah, to Nadine, to Steve, and to Ziysah. You did a great job. To Showplace, to Emily Martin and everyone at Showplace, they donate this space and the time of their crew to make this event possible. They've been tremendous supporters of Artsvote for whichever level of government for years, so thank you to Emily and the board. To our absolutely spectacular program coordinator who does a great job and has my back all the time and keeps EC3 from stumbling and fumbling, the wonderful Gabe Pollock. Dan English, our fearless camera person. There is no event he can't capture. The Artsvote Coalition, and I would just like to read out the names of these organizations. In addition to EC3, Trent Radio, Artspace, the Market Hall, the Theatre on King, just think about these great groups in Peterborough, folks. The Peterborough Symphony Orchestra, Spark Photo Festival, ReFrame Film Festival, Orchestras Canada, which is headquartered here, Public Energy, Showplace, the Peterborough Symphony Orchestra, the Peterborough Singers, and New Stages Theatre Company. Thank you all for the great work you do for our city. To the EC3 board, 3 of them are here tonight. We couldn't carry on our work without our fabulous board. And finally, to our funders, particularly the City of Peterborough, the Ontario Arts Council, and Canadian Heritage. We're very, very fortunate to have the support that we do as an Arts Council. This year, we will be able to distribute $125,000 in funding to artists and arts organization. And 5 years ago, what did we figure it was, Bill? 15,000. So our city has come a really long way in a really short period of time, and it wouldn't have been possible without the ongoing support of our funders, helping us raise more money for the arts. So closing statements from the candidates, and we'll, I think, go back to our original rotation, and starting with Jen.
I want to start by thanking Sue, Gabe, Nadine, Steve, Ziysah. I'm sure I'm missing Dan. I can't remember your name, sound guy. Thank you to all of you for organizing this and making it happen. Thank you to all the organizations that you listed and that keep coming. There they are, those guys. Thank you. Thank you for the work and the commitment to the arts in Peterborough. Your work makes our community stronger and more beautiful, and we're grateful for it. Thanks to all of you for coming out tonight. Amazing, despite whatever Stormageddon, and those of you listening on Trent Radio, thanks for listening. This election is about voting for someone who will stand up for Peterborough Kawartha. that includes standing up for the arts, community, and artists. Precarious workers of all types were so badly hurt by the pandemic, and that certainly includes artists and art workers. You deserve someone who cares about you and wants to make your life better by making life more affordable and providing the critical public services you can depend on to pursue your goals, dreams, and passions. Artwork is work. Arts workers, film and television workers, musicians, visual and performance artists, publishers, museum workers, and so on should be respected, protected, and supported. I ask you to keep in mind that many commitments have been made tonight during the course of this discussion tonight. Our incumbent isn't here to answer for his record or for the record of the Ford government. So let me remind you that Ford cut millions of dollars in base funding from the Ontario Arts Council. He suspended the agency's Indigenous Culture Fund. Cuts to education have meant cuts to music, theatre, and visual arts programs in school. And that has been to the detriment of kids across the province who rely on those arts to express themselves, find a way in life, and who are, in fact, our future artists that feed all of the organizations that, oh, they're there again. Art in schools in our community are not a frill, as you mentioned at the beginning of this tonight. For many children and adults, expression through the arts is literally a lifesaver. And the arts community is often a refuge, an affirmation for those who struggle to find their voice and place in an often unwelcoming and intolerant world. When other governments had the chance to build up and support the arts community, they let you down. Ontario's NDP is committed to restoring and investing additional funding to the Ontario Arts Council, the Indigenous Culture Fund, and Ontario Music Fund. Artists and art workers are worse off after years of cuts to public services we all depend on. Imagine how much more stable, how much freer, and frankly, how much more creative arts workers would be if they could worry less about how much it would cost them out of pocket to visit the dentist for basic dental care. How much more time would artists be able to devote to their life's work if they didn't need to stay in day jobs they dislike or simply do not fulfill their passions because they're relying on benefits for themselves and their families? How much better would life be for all of us in Peterborough and Kawartha if artists were free to beautify and enhance our communities through their talent and skill without worrying about accessing much-needed mental health cares and supports? We would all benefit. We have lost years of enrichment because of previous government inaction. There are so many creative solutions to these problems. Art workers have been advocating for these creative solutions for years. I am not an artist, nor an art teacher, but I am a collaborator and a listener.
1 minute, Jen.
Thank you. As your MPP, I will consult with artists and art workers in Peterborough, Kawartha to get tangible results for the art community, starting with the commitments Andrea Horvath and Ontario's NDP has made, but going forward as I have this conversation with you and hear what your concerns and needs are. It doesn't need to be the way it's been for the last number of years. Things can be better, and we deserve better. When NDP leader Andrea Horvath is elected Premier, she will work for us, and I will work for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jen. Robert?
Yes. So, yeah, thank you everyone who organized this debate and who is in the audience, whether online or through the radio. We have seen how important arts are as a result of recent tragedies, recent the storm, and they allow emotions to be expressed, and they also educate us, provide joy, entertainment, and hope. They aid scientists in expressing concern for the environment. And I believe that the arts community are a partner and should be invested in. And this includes support for a basic income and climate adaptation, along with internet, broadband, and addressing the a lot of society's issues and the discrimination faced by racialized communities and indigenous nations. It will be helpful, and restoring many of the cuts to that the Ford government made needs to occur to support a strong, vibrant arts community. And housing is huge. And I talked about how a green government would support building affordable housing specific for the arts community, as well as engaging through innovative means where artists are at. And yeah, I've been inspired by a lot of the displays that I've seen throughout my life, and I currently work at a museum, so I know how education plays a role that you don't see in a classroom. So thank you again.
Thank you, Robert. And Greg, the last closing statement for tonight.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you also to all the organizers. I've had the privilege of supporting democracy work abroad. I know how valuable these conversations are, and so thank you for putting in the work to make sure that we could get together and talk about the important, amazing work that artists in the Peterborough Kawartha community do. I believe that the greatest threat to the arts community in Peterborough Kawartha is the Doug Ford Conservative government, and the cuts and the chaos that they have caused, and the disregard that I believe that they have for the arts community in Peterborough. It is disappointing that our MPP could not be here today to talk about his record. We heard a lot of agreement amongst the people on the stage, and so I'm very grateful to Robert and to Jen for sharing their plans. I think that we heard a lot of really great ideas across the stage, and I'm really proud of that, and that's why I think it would have been very helpful to have our MPP here. Because we know that arts and culture is the beating heart of Peterborough Kawartha. I mean, it is our voices, it is our stories, it is what our community is at its very, very best. And it deserves a government, you deserve a government that is going to support the arts community and to be a partner for you and have your back. And on June 2nd, which is just in 1 week from today, our community has a really, really important choice to make. You know, we can choose to fund the arts and not smoggy highways. We can choose to fund a basic income pilot program and not support cuts and chaos. We can choose to support our education system to make sure more kids can study art and learn. We can choose to have smaller class sizes and a better transit system and a healthcare system that's going to support everyone in our community. And that is a really, really important choice that we have to make. That's the reason that I am running. We desperately need a local MPP who is going to fight for you, who's going to represent this community, and who is going to take your voice every single day to Queen's Park to make sure that the voice of Peterborough Kawartha resonates through the halls. Not Doug Ford's voice in Peterborough, but indeed Peterborough Kawartha's voice for you at Queen's Park. That is the most important thing. You can choose on June 2nd a better, more caring provincial government. You can choose a great local MPP. I can't wait to get started to be advocating for you and all of the amazing arts programs and arts and culture initiatives that really are the backbone of our community. So on June 2nd, I ask for your vote because Peterborough Kawartha, we need a change. Thank you very, very much.
Jen Deck, NDP. Greg Dempsey, Liberal. Robert Gibson, Green Party. Thank you all so much. Somebody stole the words from me already. It has been an inspiration to have you here tonight, to hear the subject so close to our hearts taken very, very seriously and given such careful attention. I know you're tired. I know you've been hard on the trail. We want to cheer all of you on, wish you the very best in the rest of your campaign, and we're going to leave you tonight with, we hope, we know will be some uplifting moments. And now, no, seriously, thank you very, very much. A round of applause. Watch social media for information on when you can see this debate and hear this debate, these discussions. But we're going to wrap up tonight with some art, which is how we like to do it. And I'm going to introduce our Poet Laureate, Sarah Lewis. Yes, thank you, Sarah.
Okay. Yeah, I can sit down. I'm pretty tired. So, yeah, Chamiquech, thank you. I'm really honored and happy to have been a part of this, and I've never been a part of something like this before. Art is activism for me, and I think that folks who are in politics and who are the voices for change are the ones that need to hear the messages that I am trying to send out. So I'm grateful that I can do that. And yeah, so I'm going to share a poem. It's called More Than a Poem, and I wrote this because art saved my life, and I think that as a marginalized person, as an Indigenous woman, our voices have been silenced historically and continue to be silenced. And when we're offered a stage, when we're given a mic, and able to tell our stories, it not only empowers us, but it speaks our truth, and it creates awareness. It creates potentially changed behavior. Maybe it'll change someone's mind, teach them about our history. So that's what this poem is about. My mind is an arena of ancient lost scrolls my ancestors hid from calloused cross-building hands. Teachings, truth, land, and culture wrap around teeth and spit into this mic, fighting to be heard. Oral tradition and storytelling is embedded in my blood they called savage. And I live up to the title, ravaging these stanzas, all a part of creators' plans. I'ma make her proud. Know that I'm not known to sugarcoat the truth, rhyme genocide with something pretty and fruitful to make your ears dance or sweeten your palate. I call it like it is. They put pesticides on these plants, killing off what was unfamiliar was their plan B, sprayed onto our family trees. Because you see, my grandfather's skin intimidated map makers, poets, encyclopedists, and historians could not compete with the rich traditions, knowledge, stories, and history carried in his creases. Jealous of his relation to the land, would never put a hand on or flagpole in her, and for that she trusted him with her children. Us, dear wise one, my grandmother says, filling the space between third eye and heart chakra, you are descendant of moss, fungi, bug, bark, and water, so stand up for your family. Stand up for the future generations. Your voice is medicine, antibiotic for viral colonialism, the pandemic that no one talks about. You're the water after the drought, after we've been sucked dry of our resources, of our autonomy, sucked dry of the words we wanted to say that day but didn't have the courage to. Quench the thirst of young minds. Plead they stand up to these greedy, needy, stealing of unceded territory terrorists. Their voices, their raised fists are gifts. This is more than hand to pen, pen to paper. This is more than a collection of poems or 15 minutes of fame. These words connect to resurrect the silenced ones, expose the violent acts on mother tongues, mouths held shut by wooden planks 6 feet under. They're the fire that will burn these planks to embers. They speak through you and me, a revelry of united elders stand behind you and me. And you know, the irony is that these savages were never the ones with the finger on the trigger, but always behind the barrel of the machine that bites. But my poetry is a peaceful protest, a right. I don't need guns to blow you away, so please don't shoot the messenger. I put my tobacco down, pray that these grounds return to us, the same ones they preyed on the grounds of helping us, took our trees, turned them into an imaginary currency that I now have to dedicate my entirety to achieve, something that I already had a right to, something that allows me to breathe, to live. They tell me I need their money to breathe, to live. So I decolonize their syllabus to living, burn their standardized tests I was never able to pass, laugh at the man who calls himself a philanthropist, immerse myself in his system and become his therapist. Tell him he has mommy issues, toxic relationship with Mother Earth, but she's not taking his shit no more. She knows her worth. You want to give back to the people? Be a big man? Here, read this poem I wrote and give us back our land. This is activism. This is speaking silence into riot. The stories are braided in my hair. Poetry is my meditation. My prayer can be found after my father's death, throughout my addiction, at a Wet'suwet'en protest, the moment I fall in love with life again. Because when a crack pipe becomes a pen, a eulogy becomes a poem, a hate crime becomes a rally, becomes a policy, saves a child's life. This is more than a few words that rhyme. This is a lifeline. So will you share your gift? Future you is asking. Will you pick up when it calls you? Thank you.
Ziysah, Von B.
Is this mic on? Yeah. Well, I'm going to stand up because I'm tired, and this way I'll stay awake. Bieberstein. Gets you every time. So, I was walking down the street today thinking about what poem I should do, and I saw someone I know, a community leader who's been involved in this community for over 2 decades. And I was just gonna say, hi, how are you, as I walked by, which I did, but she didn't say fine, thanks. She said, I feel a lot of despair. And she told me that she'd spent the whole day talking to different city services and community organizations and hearing from people that are suffering and still in the dark. And yeah, and I said, you know, I haven't been able to do anything for like 2 years. I've just been surviving and like making sure my kids are okay. And I haven't been out there on the streets, you know? And she said, actually, I keep going back to this poem and it helps me a lot. And so don't think that you're not doing anything. So I wanted to think about her and all the people who are out helping people, like grassroots, through this really difficult time, even like the three of you, I can't imagine over the last 2 years like getting the energy to put myself in a political race and do all that work, so thank you so much. And then Sue and all of EC3, all the work that they're doing to make this happen in these conditions. But also the people who aren't doing those things. You know, if you're sitting at home thinking or grieving, that's really important as well. And I think that's, we don't really understand when we talk about arts, we just think about painting and music and doing these things. But the real role of artists in the community is to look at things differently, to create the space for transformation by being able to step away sometimes from all that busyness. And so thank you to everyone who's doing that as well. And the poem she was talking about, I decided to read today, and I wrote it soon after Ford was elected and was slashing funding for education. And we were all saying, stop the cuts. So it's called Stop the Cuts. But it's more than that. Stop the cuts. This is actually going to be some excerpts from it so that you can go home tonight at some point. Stop the cuts. Really? That is our big demand? Have we been rendered so hopeless, so dreamless, so weak that the most we can ask for is not to increase the wreckage? We can do better. We need to do better. What do you actually desire? Or were you taught not to? Were you told your ideas were sweet but simplistic, imagination inconvenient, dreams unrealistic? Were you told to stop whining, say please and thank you, always placate those who outrank you? Were you conditioned to serve your father first, attuned to everyone else's thirsts? Is it selfish to crave more than survival? You see, our most dangerous rival isn't the villain sitting sipping buck of beer in a Muskoka chair under a friendly veneer, no. Our biggest rival is our own self-doubt, separating us from the planet that sustains us, the truth that reaches and rages, transmits old pain to us. Our kids call us out. They smell our bullshit. Before they jump ship, let's show them how to steer it. They know what they're learning is not what they need if they're to change course and face down global greed. They reveal our hypocrisies, interrogate our lives. We've done our best with what we had, but now it is time. It is time to stop. Stop defending and start upending. Stop fighting over scraps tossed down by higher classes. Flip the whole fucking table. Food enough for the masses. No more meager begging. No more tidy requests. Dream massive dreams that dare to be best. Refuse to sew up holes abusers tear through our clothes. Leave them to the mending. We have work to be tending. Desires unwatered. Begging for attention. Posing a new version of Mary Oliver's question. What would we do with our children's precious lives? What if I told you, no dream is planted that isn't worth reaping? I memorized colonial borderlands, learned never to speak without raising my hand. I never really learned that one actually, but I learned how to spell, do science and math, but why did no one tell me that? That my desires are sacred gifts to be cared for. If we had been taught to trust our guts, we wouldn't be saying, stop the cuts. We'd be chanting, let's grow a better world together. Proclaiming radical transformation, it's now or never. We'd envision so much more than what's slipping through our hands. A chorus of voices singing our demands, mentors for every child, learning on the land. We wouldn't be begging, we'd be insisting. Keep Earth at this, oh my God. This is not emotional when I wrote it, but it's an intense time right now. We wouldn't be begging, we'd be insisting. Keep Earth at the center, value all ways of thinking. Each one of us is unique, no such thing as typical. Relationships are key and make them reciprocal. We'd be saying, let's do better. We'd be pledging, we will do better, with or without our perimeter. From within or without these giant boxes, sometimes you have to burn something down before you can build a better thing up. What if the first part is being done for us? What if we are knee-deep in fertile soil, and like a forest after a fire, this is a chance for something new or ancient to live? Thank you.
June the 2nd, if not before. Get out there and vote. Art matters, and so does your vote. Thank you again very much, candidates. Take care, everybody. Keep the faith.